Welcome to the Human Meme Podcast. I'm David Bowles, and today we dig into the idea of what scares us and who is controlling that fear. The mask in the glass case. I want to tell you about a clay mask. It sits in a glass case at the British Museum in the Mesopotamian galleries. The mask is approximately 3,800 years old, made in southern Iraq during the Old Babylonian period. Its face was made to terrify. The hair tangles into serpentine coils across the brow. The grin is bared, with one tooth chipped on the left side. Hooded sockets sink the eyes into darkness. Time has cracked the surface of the clay in 7 places that I have counted. That mask was paid for. Someone took silver from a temple administrator's hand and walked it across the city to a workshop, where a craftsman took clay and pigment and several days of his working life and converted them into a monster. The monster was a job. The figure left the workshop on the back of a delivery cart, settled by an invoice that the temple's accountants logged in their cuneiform ledgers. We do not know who the patron was. The artisan is also anonymous to us. The tablets that recorded the rate structures of the Old Babylonian craft economy survive in archives in London and Chicago and Berlin, and those tablets establish that the transaction happened, even though the specific contract for this specific mask has not survived. That mask is the opening case in my new book, Commissioned Monsters: A Labor History of Fear. The book is out today. I want to tell you why I wrote it. For most of the past century, when scholars asked where monsters come from, the answer they reached for was some version of the collective unconscious. The argument runs that the monster expresses what a culture cannot name in plain speech. A witch figure encodes anxiety about female autonomy. The vampire stands for contagion in some readings, the zombie for consumer capitalism, or so the literature has argued at various points. The argument has value within its limits. Cultures do encode anxieties in figures. What the argument has consistently left out is the labor. Every monster you have ever encountered in any medium from any culture was made by somebody. A person sat down at a desk or a workbench or an editing bay and made decisions about what the monster would look like, what it would do, who would be afraid of it. That person was paid for those decisions. Other people then profited from the figure once it was in circulation. Once you start asking who wrote the invoice, the figure starts to look different. Consider the welfare queen. That figure entered American political life in 1976, when Ronald Reagan, on his presidential campaign trail, told a story about a Chicago woman named Linda Taylor, who, he said, had defrauded the welfare system of $150,000 across multiple aliases. The story was carried by the wire services. The figure became permanent in American political discourse. It still operates today. What is rarely told is that Linda Taylor was a real person who did commit welfare fraud, and that the actual amount was approximately $8,000, and that she was also under investigation for kidnapping, identity theft across multiple decades, and the apparent homicide of one of her boyfriend's previous wives, an investigation the Cook County prosecutor declined to bring charges on for evidentiary reasons. The actual story was about a serial criminal whose race the journalists at the time were unsure about, and whose actual crimes the political operatives discarded as too tangled for an effective campaign message. What was kept was the welfare fraud number multiplied roughly by 20 for emotional reach. then attached to a racialized figure designed for white anxiety about black women's reproduction. A campaign decision was made. A figure was built. People profited from it. The figure has continued doing its commissioned work for half a century, decades after Linda Taylor died in a Florida nursing home with a different name on her death certificate. This is the work the book does. Across 5 parts, 20 chapters, and 105 footnotes, the book traces the commissioning of monstrous figures from the Old Babylonian temple economy to the contemporary American immigration debate. The investigation moves through Salem, through the medieval witch manuals, through the penny press, through the McMartin prosecutions, through the Central Park case, through the Muslim ban architecture, through the Yellow Peril novels, through the cable news segments on Russian sleeper agents. The book names the contractors where the documentary record permits naming them. I wrote it because the alternative explanation, the collective unconscious frame, has been doing a kind of cultural work that I think we cannot afford to let continue unexamined. That frame lets the contractors disappear into a mist. It treats the monster as something that wells up from the depths of a society. The frame removes the question of who profited from a given figure, and once that question is removed, the possibility of accountability is removed with it. The labor history register the book operates and works in the opposite direction. There is a contractor behind every monster, an invoice behind every figure, a beneficiary behind every panic. When you locate the contractor and the invoice and the beneficiary, the figure begins to lose its supernatural quality. It becomes what it has always been. It becomes labor. Our own moment is one of dense monster commissioning. The cycle has accelerated. Where a single Old Babylonian mask once took several days of skilled labor, contemporary media operations produce dozens of monstrous figures per news cycle. The architecture has stayed consistent across 4,000 years. A contractor designs the figure. An invoice changes hands. A beneficiary collects on the panic that follows. Only the throughput has changed. I want to ask you to do something with this argument after you turn off the episode. The next time a monstrous figure appears in your political life, of whatever ideological coloring, whatever side of the discourse it operates on, run the labor analysis. Identify who designed the figure. Look for the invoice that paid for the design. Track who profits from the figure continuing its institutional work in the present moment. The answers will sometimes confirm what you already suspected. They will sometimes implicate people you would rather not implicate. Either way, the work of asking the question stays the same in every case. The clay mask in the British Museum has been doing its commissioned work for almost 4,000 years. Someone paid for that fear. Someone wanted that fear. The mask is still working. For the Human Meme Podcast, I'm David Bowles, wishing you a safe evening and a grand tomorrow. Thanks for listening. Be a human meme